Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to another Cruiser Chat with Otram. Same as usual, no real format this evening. Just here to answer questions anybody might have. And there's also a link in the description, or I'm sorry, a link in the chat to call in, join live, kind of like a Zoom call. So if anybody'd like to do that, otherwise, just type in questions in chat also works. There we go. I was checking on my phone to make sure we were actually streaming. And we are, because it's weird. It doesn't look like we're streaming from my end. So yeah, just let me know if you guys have got any questions, and I will try to answer them. Because otherwise, I don't think I've got anything very interesting to talk about. It's been a pretty boring week at the shop. I mean, we've just had general maintenance and repair through nothing interesting or out of the ordinary. Um, and Scott wants to know if I'm seeing any power systems in 80 series like LI Time, EcoFlow, etc. I'm not. We have a couple customers, that have the old school dual batteries, but I haven't really seen anybody running the new, like, lithium generators. Uh, yeah, I haven't seen any personally. And hey, Capo 204, yeah, it's going well. Hope you're having fun up in New York. Um, and then Turbo FZJ wants to know top 5 engine temp issues. I think maintenance. Maintenance is the biggest engine temp issue, like not changing your coolant, not fixing leaks, letting the coolant go empty. Um, and then, beyond that, running not clean water when you mix it with your antifreeze and getting a whole bunch of, junk built up in the radiator. Um, yeah, beyond that, fan clutch is wearing out, belts wearing out. We don't really see a ton of cooling system issues on the 1FZ. Um, and Jack says uh, that the videos have really helped on his 80. Yeah, glad they've been useful. Trying to get back into making videos more often, but trying to find the time to shoot the video while we've got a truck long enough to shoot a video, like it's not somebody waiting on their truck. It can be challenging at times. And I guess back to Turbo FZJ's question, this would be a more of a forced induction cooling system issue, but we had a customer go to a larger supercharger pulley without having a boost or air fuel gauge, and he floored the truck to pass somebody and ran it lean and melted the front two pistons. So that had to throw some heat in the cooling system because the front two pistons were just melted. It was crazy. Oh, I guess the one cool thing to mention, I've mentioned it in a couple of the podcasts, but we set up a way to schedule like one-on-one help time, which would basically be a Zoom call, like this, but one-on-one. And we finally had the first person schedule. So I'm doing the first one this Saturday, so we'll see how it goes. But I thought that was kind of cool, and it should be kind of fun. Um, and Jack wants to know if I could help some with like a locker install over Skype. I General advice, um, and like walking through things, I think you could do for a locker install, but the the setting up the actual, you know, uh, the gear pattern and feeling it, it it's one of those like setting up gears is a lot. There's a lot to the feel of doing it. You can tell everybody the technical aspects, um, and I think that would be hard to do over a video call. I think I envision it being more for like technical questions like, "Hey, I've got this electrical issue, where would you look?" Or, "I've got this running problem, what should I look at?" And walking through things like that. I think doing gear setup would be difficult. I'd be willing to give it a shot, but I don't know how well that would work. Um, and Turbo FZJ wants to know if I'll be recording the one-on-ones and posting them, and are you able to see my paid message this time? Uh, I I will be recording the one-on-ones, so that I can send the recorded copy, to the person that scheduled it. Uh, I don't know about posting them. Like I'd have to clear it with that, each individual person, to see how they'd feel about it. Since they'd be paying me for the time, it's not something that I could just, dispense into the world afterward. And I'm not sure if I'm getting your paid message. I doubt it if you're asking because I didn't answer it, which is really weird because this is supposed to be pulling all of the stream chats into one place, and it seems like it's skipping a lot of them. But if I try to leave the other streams open, I get a lot of crosstalk on the the audio, and I haven't been able to figure out how to get rid of that. So growing pains with the new system. Um, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Got a question. Non-ABS 80 series and my brake pedal sinks to the floor sitting at red lights. Booster's good. Could this be an old master cylinder issue? Uh, most likely, yes. That would be my first. If it slowly sinks to the floor while you're sitting there, it's almost always brake master unless you've got a leak somewhere. So that's the first thing I would go for. Fluid being old and soft lines being old generally won't cause it to sink. Although, fluid is cheap and easy to replace, and the soft lines aren't horrible either. And Jack wants to know if I play any video games. Not a ton. I've got a couple on Steam. Cody, our service advisor, talked me into getting Goat Simulator 3 earlier this week. And it's a completely stupid game, but so much fun. So I'm playing that and Spirit of the North 2 right now, but I am not good at video games. And Turbo FZJ, if you want to just re-ask a message like as a not super chat, it likely will come through. Because I'm seeing, I think I'm seeing everything that's not super chat and not highlighted. But it's weird the way it's aggregating them. What is the max temp before detonation? I don't know that there is a max temp before detonation. There's so many other variables that are going to go into that that I don't know that you can go by temp gauge and see what the max temp for detonation, because detonation, at least the way I understand it, is more of a fuel mixture timing advance issue. I mean, yes, having higher cylinder temps are going to contribute to that happening sooner. But if you've got, proper fuel ratio and your timing's not way too far advanced, I don't know that temperature is going to super play into that. On my Turbo 80, cruising down the highway, with an ambient temperature outside of 85, 90, I'm seeing 200, 205 degrees, cruising, coming down to a stoplight and idling, it might bump up to 207, 208. I've never seen it go as high as 222. And I don't think I would run a 1FZ that hot. But it's also hard to say because it's also going to depend on where you're tapped in to get that temperature reading. I'm tapped into the top radiator hose outlet for mine, which seems to run hotter than what the scan tool reads for the engine temp. There's just so many variables that go into it that it's really hard to say. I know a lot of the modern stuff, they don't even turn the fans on till 215 or 220, and they'll go 230, 240. But I don't think I'd want to run a 1FZ that hot. I think that's just asking for head gasket issues. But I don't really have empirical data to back that up. It's just a gut feeling. And from seeing what we've seen driving around, a couple of turboed 80s. I know the land tank modified fan clutch helped a lot with mine, keeping it running cooler. And Chris says that he replaced his parking brake after watching my videos. Huge thanks. Is there any adjustment on the handle side of the 80 series parking brake, or is it strictly at the adjuster screw? Yes, there is an adjustment on the handle side. If you take like the leather boot cover off, I believe it's a 10 millimeter nut on a long rod that will take up the slack in the cables. You just have to be careful that you don't take out too much slack. And, start activating the brakes from there. And Turbo FZJ says, using Ultra Gauge, always go into panic mode, AC off, running hills at 214. I think if you're momentarily climbing to 214, like when you're on a hill, like, and, I assume you're, hammer down trying to go up the hill, I think momentary jumping up that high, probably not a huge deal. I just wouldn't want to be running sustained up that high. And Cody says, so does meth injection. Yeah, I should have said that as well. I'm running meth injection on my truck to try to keep detonation down, and to help with cylinder cooling. But it's kind of a pain to keep mess with. You got to keep the meth topped up, and it keeps like going out of tune, and I keep having to mess with it. So it's actually turned off on my truck right now. And Cody's the one you can blame for me playing Goat Simulator instead of editing videos. Oh, this one's a long one. 96 Land Cruiser, and ever since removing the aftermarket alarm, I have a random electrical issues, airbag light always on, brake lights occasionally inoperative, and now the OBD2 port doesn't work. Would it be better to get a new dash harness or pull the dash and test the harness for damage? Are dash harnesses available? It's probably going to be way less work to just check the harness like in situ, because anything that the aftermarket alarm guy was going to screw up, they would have been able to get to, without pulling the harness out. It's just going to be a matter of seeing what they screwed up. I've seen so many bad alarm installs and just lazy, horrible installs. For peace of mind, yeah, a new dash harness would be awesome, but the work to put that in is gonna be not fun. And I don't know if they're still available. I know the engine side harness is, but I've never done a dash harness in one to need to call for it. And I am not responding or dignifying Cody's response. But yeah, I mean, most of what an alarm installer would have been into would be right like along the steering column, and then in that driver kick panel. Like the driver kick panel is likely where they would have tapped into like lights, door locks, power windows, all that jazz. and then the column would be for starter kill and all that. And Turbo FCJ says, on the land tank fan clutch recommendation, orange or blue? It's my understanding that the orange one goes with the supercharger, and it's because of the different length, because of the supercharger. But I could be mistaken. I'm running a blue one on mine. You could always call Rick and ask him, but I've always associated the orange one with a supercharger. And I always associated it with a supercharger because the hub length is different. And I don't know if that's just to put the fan closer to the radiator, or if that's something to do with the spacing, with the extra supercharger belt. So yeah, I run a blue one on mine, but I would call Rick and ask him his opinion, since he does them. Chris wants to know if Artemis is my running buddy or is she my lap dog. She's sleeping behind me back here. I think she would be a good running buddy if she wasn't absolutely terrified of everything. That's why she's in here, and all of the other dogs are in the other side of the house. This is her safe space, and she freaks out if she can't be in here. Like, she sleeps in here, all day, except for when she's out playing in the yard. We don't know what happened to her before we adopted her, but it was obviously something bad, and she is on the highest dose of anxiety medicine she can have, and that just makes her kind of normal. Like, we've had her 2 years, and she's just started going into the kitchen. So when we take her out hiking, you'll go up the trail, and as long as there's nobody else around, she's fine. But as soon as somebody else comes up, she either freezes or jumps into the woods and tries to escape. So trying to run with her would not be fun. But she is super cuddly. So I guess lapdog, long story short. Um, 96 Land Cruiser, a lot of deferred maintenance from the previous owner, and there's a high-pitched whining noise from the rear underload. Is it more likely differential issue or wheel bearings? My guess would be differential. My guess would be pinion bearing. But without hearing it and seeing it, that's, just a guess. I've never heard 80 series rear wheel bearings make noise. And usually when wheel bearings make noise, it's a lower, grumblier sound rather than a high pitch. But you'll get a high pitch whine from a pinion bearing going bad, because as it moves in and out from the slop in the bearing, it changes the pattern on the gear, and you'll hear the gears whine. And Turbo FCJ says he's running Safari Turbo. Thanks, he'll chat with Rick, but you are running the blue fan with a turbo. Yes, I'm running one of his blue fan clutches with a turbo. And I'm running just the factory fan that came on the truck. The only mod in my cooling system is the blue fan clutch. and I've got water wetter in the coolant just to try to help with heat transfer. 87 FJ60 having a weird issue with brief voltage spikes, AC speed increases as well, so it's not a gauge error. I'm terrible at anything electrical. Any ideas where to start? It's been forever and a day since I've looked at an FJ60 alternator, but I am pretty sure those are internally regulated. In which case, I would start at the alternator because it's likely a failing voltage regulator that's increasing the voltage. You could theoretically have resistance somewhere that's making the alternator think that it's putting out less voltage than it is, and then it's trying to add voltage to compensate. But most likely it's just an internal voltage regulator issue, and replacing the alternator would fix it. But that's really hard to say without like actually testing it and catching it in the act to know for sure what it's doing. But if you can audibly hear the fan get faster when it spikes, then most likely it is a true voltage spike. And most likely that is the alternator doing it. But you'd want to test it to be sure. And would it be better to have a shop address pinion bearing issues, or is it relatively easy to DIY? I know it's a preload is a concern. If you've never done gears before, I would leave that to a shop, because you're gonna have to take the bearings out, replace them. You're gonna have to set the preload on the crush sleeve, which takes specialty tools, and then you're gonna have to reset the backlash and the preload on the carrier bearings. So, it's one of those, it can be done DIY, but you're gonna have to get a couple specialty tools. But it's another one of those, like, it takes a feel and an eye to get it right. So you'd be better to have somebody do it that's, familiar with doing ring and pinion work. And then 95 LX450, sometimes the brake pedal sinks and hard to stop. Sometimes it's stiff at the top and hard to press down. Sometimes ABS actuates on slow turns. ABS light randomly comes on, but it's off 99% of the time. You likely have more than one issue there. The pedal sinking, you could have 3 issues. The pedal sinking is usually master cylinder leaking internally. Brake pedal getting hard to press down is usually booster failing. And then ABS sometimes actuating on slow turns is usually a dirty ABS sensor, or the mounting surface for the sensor has gotten rusty enough that it's moved the sensor away from the tone ring a little bit, and the ABS can't get a good pulse reading at slow speed and thinks something's spinning, because when it loses signal, it thinks that wheel's locked up. So that is going to be fun to track down. Yeah, 80 series brakes, especially pedal feel, it can be a lot of fun. Like, my truck has had absolutely everything except for the ABS block replaced, and has the squishiest brakes known to man. Still stops, and it will lock them up, but the brakes feel horrible. Even with everything replaced. So it's really hard to say without seeing it and feeling it. But again, usually if the pedal sinks down, and you lose braking, that's internal master cylinder leak, unless you've got a leak somewhere else, but that, usually wouldn't be random. Although my brother's 80, he had complaints of his pedal randomly sinking and he put a new booster on it, and it solved it. In which, if you've got it going randomly hard, and that would usually be booster as well. So I would probably start with booster and go from there. Um, like, I have no idea why a booster would solve a soft brake pedal, but it fixed my brother's. And we did an 80 a couple of weeks ago that replacing the load sensing proportioning valve seemed to help, quite a bit with firming the brakes up. But that could have been a coincidence. There could have just been air trapped in it um, that was causing the spongy brakes. Yeah, whenever anybody calls complaining of soft or spongy brakes on an 80, we always tell them, hey, we'll take a look at it, but there's a chance you could replace everything and still not solve it. And I'm pretty sure that's coming down to the ABS blocks leaking internally, which they're no longer available. And we see it as a common enough problem that using a used one, the chances of it fixing anything, aren't that great, because all of them have several 100,000 miles on them by now, and 30 years. So it's likely that any used used ABS, block you get is going to have the same issue. Oh, and I should also mention we're going up to the Catskills in a couple of weeks for a long weekend of hiking trips. So if anybody's from up that way and has, can't miss hiking trails that I should hit while we're up there, pass them along, please. And should ABS blocks be a Toyota Heritage reproduction request? Um, yeah, that would be awesome to see because, a lot of people bypass, or delete the ABS. I really like the idea of ABS and having it. So it would be great to be able to, fully replace everything on an 80 and, know that you've got new everything, for rolling problems out. I can't imagine how much that would cost if they were to bring it back. Um, but it would likely be worthwhile for those people that, want to keep everything functioning 100%. So yeah, it would be great if they could bring those back. If they could bring back 80 steering boxes too, because I heard those have gone discontinued. And we see so many 80 series with sloppy steering boxes. And we've sent so many of them off and gotten, leaky boxes back for boxes that weren't leaking when we sent them away. We just needed them, tightened up. Spencer wants to know what my thoughts are on EGR delete on a 1FC FE. I would not do it. There's no reason to do it. It is not 1970s. You're not going to get extra power from it. My understanding is the EGR is there to help keep ping down on highway cruising by putting inert gas back into the cylinder to take up space. So I would not delete it. Yeah, Toyota designed it in for a reason. I know there's all the EPA guidelines and all that jazz, but the computer was designed with having functional EGR, in the programming. So if you delete it, you're likely not optimally fueling or timing, whatever the computer's looking for. It's not going to know what to do with the EGR gone. That said, we get so many that, come in with the EGR flow insufficient code. So we use like the HUD Expo plugs to make the computer think that the EGR is flowing so it stops tripping a check engine light, but I don't actually delete the EGR, because a lot of them are still at least semi-functional. So I let the EGR function to the extent that it still can, because I like the fact that it's there and I think it's doing something useful. So I don't delete it. I don't block the ports or block any of the vacuum actuators. I just use the electrical plug to keep the light off. But yeah, there's nothing to gain from deleting it. And it's technically federal emissions tampering to delete it. So that is not something I would be getting into. And I just realized looking through the chat, it's telling me where all of the chats are coming from, and it's only listing YouTube. And I know we're also streaming to Twitch, which I don't expect anybody to be watching on Twitch, but we're also streaming to the Facebook. And I know last week I had Facebook people on there, but it's not showing any Facebook chats if anybody has actually sent in questions. So I guess I'm going to have to figure that out in addition to the YouTube super chats not showing up. And so it's really not worth the time to fully fix the EGR. On the 1FZs, there's so many stupid things that can fail. It can be the temp sensor. It can be the EGR valve, although I've never actually seen an EGR valve go bad on a 1FC. It can be the little vacuum switching valves under the intake. It can be clogged ports, either going through the intake or in the throttle body. It can be the EGR modulator. And whenever we've actually gone through the whole course of actually fully fixing it, it's usually a combination of several of those. Like you'll have 2, 3, 4 of those things have failed. So you fix one and it's like, okay, it still doesn't work. You fix another, okay, it still doesn't work. And then you keep having to sort through everything. And it never fails that, we get one working fully functional. And then, 6 months later, another part of the system, craps out. And it's just, it seems like it's a never ending, circle of issues. So while it would be best to fully fix it, usually people aren't willing to pay for the testing and the back and forth and going through everything to fully fix it. And where we live, there's not emissions testing. So people just really aren't into paying for it. And Spencer says that he's been watching the 1FZ head gasket video and it's been extremely helpful. And he read somewhere that the EGR might be to blame for frequent head gasket failures. I think the people blaming Granted, this is also just gut feeling. I don't have any data to back this up, but I think people are blaming the EGR because the EGR flows through the back of the head behind number 6, and there's, been, reports that the non-EGR, world spec 1FZs, didn't have as many head gasket failures as the US ones with the EGR. But the a head gasket failure is so rare on a 1FZ. Like, it does not happen as much as the internet makes it sound like it does. I've done, in the past 20 years, I've done 5 for actually being blown, maybe 6. I've done, dozens of people wanting me to do this preventative maintenance, but they don't really seem to pop as often as the internet makes out. And, when they do, yeah, a lot of times it's on number 6 or on number, between 5 and 6. But that's also the back of the engine against the firewall with no airflow. So it's gonna run hotter back there just by the nature of the way the engine's designed. So I don't know that you can really pin it down to, the EGR flowing through the back of the head casting. But again, I'm not an engineer. I don't do failure analysis. It's just one of those. It's my gut feeling that no, I don't think the EGR is contributing to it. And the ones that I have seen blown, they're not blown on the very back edge, like where the EGR would be getting it hot. It's blown further forward, like, between 5 and 6. I mean, it's possible that it's a contributor. I wouldn't think so. Chris wants to know on 96 Land Cruiser, aside from the steering box, are there any wear parts in the steering shaft that can help tighten up the steering? There's the U joints, like right at the steering box, and then I'm pretty sure there's one right where the column goes through on the inside, right before the firewall. Those could potentially have wear in them. I've never seen one wear out, but potentially there could be slop there. I'm trying to remember if there's a rag joint. I don't think there's a rag joint in the 80s. I think that went away with the 62. But the steering box seems to be the biggie. They just get sloppy. And tie rod ends, and the panhard bar bushings, could play into that as well, because if the panhard bar bushings are worn out and some of your steering goes into taking up the slop in the panhard bushing, then that'll add slop too. And Charleston says, yes, there is a rag joint. Cool. Thank you for that. Yeah, I'm trying to picture it in my head. And I'm not picturing the rag joint, but yeah. It's one of those, it's crazy. For as many cruises as you see, like all day long, it's like, does that have a rag joint in it? I don't remember. And Nigel says he's saying hi from Moab. Collector's Edition, Triple Lock, just turned 309,000 miles. Hey, how's it going? And you've got catching up to do, because I'm almost to 360 on mine. One of these days I'll get out to Moab. Probably not to wheel, but I'd like to get out there to hike. Colorado is beautiful. Arizona is beautiful. I can only imagine how awesome Utah is. So we've got a 100 series at the shop right now. I think he's at 420,000. And we've had, I think, 2 trucks come through with 500,000 on them, which is crazy. Front burps just started clicking, coming down Schaefer Trail. Do you think there's anything to worry about immediately? If it's just starting to click, you're probably okay. I'd probably be easy on it. I haven't broken one in an 80. But when my Forerunner still had mini truck axles under it, I was really good at breaking Burfields. And every now and then they would break and explode the bell, and the bell would jam, and you would lose steering. So they can be fun. So I would just be worried about that. But yeah, if they're just lightly clicking, you're probably okay. You'll know when it's broken. Oh, and Spencer says his dad has a 100 series with 480. Yeah, we've seen a couple hundreds go super high mileage, which around here they seem to rot out before they hit that kind of mileage. But yeah, I mean, I know we've had a Tundra through with over 500,000 on it. And I'm pretty sure we've had 100 through with 500,000. And we've had several 80s with over 400. Okay, and the rag joints on the inside on it, that's why I'm not visualizing it. And yes, now that you say that, I can visualize exactly where it was. I was working from like steering box up to firewall and not seeing it. So yeah, thank you. And I need to replace that seal on my truck because it blows so much hot air through the firewall. And Eric says lately on his 96, when he shuts it off, he hears a whistling sound like pressure bleeding off. Any ideas? Sounds like it might be AC related. AC's working fine and blowing cold. It certainly could be AC. I hear a lot of them make a whistle sound when you shut them off, and it's the pressure equalizing between the high and low side. Because like when you're running, and depending on outside temperatures, your low side of the system can be down like 35, 40 psi, and on a really hot day, your high side can be up like 300. And when you shut it off, those bleed back through the system, like through the compressor and through the expansion valve to equalize. So you may be hearing that. I guess it could also be a vacuum leak at the brake booster, but I would assume you would feel that in braking performance. So I would guess that it's AC. And if it is AC, it's not a problem that needs to be corrected. It's just like the way the system works. And Nigel wants to know if you need an engine on an 80, would you opt for a rebuild or an LS swap? We don't do LS swaps at the shop. We've got a couple customers with them, and they can be awesome, but good Lord, are they expensive. The one really nice one that comes through, I think it was like $80,000. And I know I've heard quotes of 120. So I would opt for a rebuild on the 80 series on the 1FZ. It's a great motor, and the way I see it, you drive a Toyota for Toyota reliability. So why would you put GM garbage in a Toyota? And we get people all the time are like, oh, when we give them a price on what a rebuilt 1FC costs, they're like, oh, well, I could do an LS swap for that. I just read about it all the time on the internet, and it's like, no, like some people can do a 1F or an LS swap, if they're using a junkyard motor, junkyard trans, and doing the labor themselves. Yes, you can do it on the cheap, but actually paying a shop to do it and doing it right is ungodly expensive. And we get a lot of people not understanding that distinction, because they read about somebody on the internet that did it for, $20K. And it's like, yeah, that's somebody doing it, in their backyard shop, not, and doing it the labor themselves, not paying a shop to do it. It's, yeah. I don't see the awesomeness of the LS swap. And Eric says, thanks for the videos and the chat. They've helped fix a lot of stuff on his rig. Yeah, no problem. I'm glad we can help. Growing up, like I got into this hobby, well before YouTube. And, years before I Hate Mud was a thing. When I started, it was all paper manuals. You couldn't look stuff up on the internet. There was the old Land Cruiser mailing list where you emailed in your question, then it sent all of the questions out to everybody that was on the list, and then people sent back their responses, and at the end of the day, you got a collated list of all the questions and responses. And I learned so much from that mailing list and like the early web pages, like, old offroad.com and old pirate, and I Hate Mud, that, doing the YouTube videos is, how I'm trying to, give back that knowledge that I got from everybody else over the years. And Nigel says, thanks for the reality check. Yeah, I don't mean to be Debbie Downer, but yeah, it's real expensive to do it right. Cody did a backyard LS swap on an old Chevy truck, and he fought and fought and fought with that thing, and finally ended up just giving up and selling it. And Spencer says his truck sat outside for about 4 years while he was rebuilding it, took the alternator to AutoZone for test, and it failed. No charge at all. What might fail on one of these alternators because of sitting? If it was working before you parked it and it failed while it was sitting, my guess would be one of the brushes is stuck. There's two brushes that run on the commutator, to get the spinning power to be not spinning power. And if those stick, then you don't have a complete circuit. That would be my guess. And also, almost every time we see a Toyota alternator fail, it's just brushes that are worn out. And you can get a brush assembly from Toyota for relatively cheap. Like it's been a while since I've gotten one, but I want to say it was like $20 or $30. It could be bearings, it could be rectifier bridge, but every time I've seen one fail, it's been the brushes. And it's pretty easy. If you've got the alternator off, you just I've got a video on changing the brushes. It's really old, and not up to the new camera specs, but it's up there. But you can just take the back cover off and you can see the brushes, and you can see if they're wearing funky or if they're not making contact. And Nigel says, last question for the night. Is he even an overlander if he doesn't have portals? Man, I think it was, I don't remember, it may have been Descent. I don't remember who it was, but somebody posted portals for a 200 series. And man, did those look cool. But yeah, I got kicked out of one of the local overlanding Facebook groups because somebody posted, asking what they needed to be an overlander, like what gear they needed. And I was like, man, I've got a Subaru and a titanium spork. That's all you need. And they did not get the humor in that and kicked me out of the group. And good luck, Spencer, that those brushes fix it. Yeah, it's a real easy thing to try first. And, in my experience has always done the trick. Especially on an 80 series where it's relatively easy to get the alternator in and out. On a 100 series, we do, just a new alternator because I'd hate to pull that thing out, put brushes in it, and put it back in only to find out that brushes didn't fix it. And Christopher wants to know if a stuck open purge valve on a 96 would cause a gas smell. I wouldn't think so because the purge valve would just be linking the charcoal canister to the intake. So you likely shouldn't be getting smell through. I mean, I guess potentially if it was really hot and the gas tank expanded, and pushed fuel vapor and overwhelmed the charcoal canister and then pushed it through enough to fill up the intake and then go, down through the air filter, I guess you could smell fuel from a open purge valve, but I wouldn't think so. And I wouldn't think a stuck closed purge valve would either. My bet on an 80 series is that you've got a leaking filler neck. They are so common to get pinholes in them and rust, especially if you've recently filled up with fuel and noticed the gas smell. Then it's a really good chance that it's the filler neck. Especially if the smell is more prominent toward the rear of the truck. Toward the front of the truck, I would lean more toward, a broken hose or a cracked charcoal canister. I don't think I've ever replaced a purge valve on a 1FC. Okay, and it smells from the front. Yeah, I would be looking for disconnected hoses, or cracked hoses, something like that, or a leaking fuel injector. Like if you've got a leaky injector O-ring, I could see, smell up there, or I guess the regulator wouldn't leak externally, it would leak into the vacuum. Yeah, leaky tank's another one, but and I guess you could smell that at the front. But that's a weird one. If you can find somebody with a smoke machine to smoke test the system, that's probably going to be your easiest way to find it. You'll low pressure, you'll fill the whole system with low pressure smoke, and then wherever the smoke comes out, that's your leak. That's how we do it at the shop. And Gregory says he just completed his first timing belt and water pump on 100 series. Thanks for the videos. Otherwise, he would have had to pay a shop to do it. Yeah, no problem. Glad we could help. And Saeed wants to know, why is the 1FZ leak oil from so many places compared to a 2UZ? I'm going to go with because they're older. We're starting to see the 2UZs leak a lot. It's just taken them longer to catch up to an 80. Yeah, and the 1FZ just has more places to potentially leak, just the way it was designed. Like the 2UZ doesn't have an oil pump cover. It doesn't have a distributor. Which are the biggie, and it doesn't have the power steering bolted on the back of the timing cover. But we are starting to see more and more 2UZs leak from the O-ring behind the oil pump and the O-ring at the back of the block under the rear main seal plate. So the 2UZs are definitely starting to catch up. But it's also just the 1FZ letting you know that it still has oil in it. And Christopher says the fuel smell is way worse at altitude, not so bad at sea level, but still present. So, they may be onto something, that it's altitude related. It may just be a combo of altitude, temperature, and overwhelming the evaporative emission system. You may have too much fume pressure in there. It could also be a bad gas cap. If the gas cap's not venting properly, you would smell it toward the back of the vehicle. So that's also something you may want to check. But we've popped past 9 o'clock, so I'm going to jump off of here because I've still got some actual work to get done tonight before I go to bed. But thanks for everybody that tuned in and asked questions, because this doesn't work without people tuning in to ask questions. And I totally just lost my train of thought. But yeah, thanks for everybody for tuning in, and I will catch you next week.